Yeah, it's weird.
Stupid.
But now we can hear the bass in your voice.
All about that bass.
Oh yeah.
All right,
In the
so
beginning,
we are going to have
God.
to re-record that entire previous episode then.
It'll go a lot faster, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Do I sound better?
You sound, yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah,
ask
it's good.
great. Is it better?
It's Tove.
This is all wrong.
Okay, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Are people going to... I have tattoos. Is anyone going to be offended?
Yes. Oh, I don't have any on my. They're all on
You
my.
gotta I was gonna say
On
you
your
have to
butt?
lift the, can
They're
you
all
look
on
for
my butt.
excuses to stretch and like oh, I'm sorry, did you see that?
Oh, all right. Here we go. Welcome to the Odd Testament podcast, everybody. Episode number 5. My name is Ryan.
And I'm Eric.
I'm Greg.
Every
And
time.
welcome in. Thanks for being here, everybody. If you are here for the first time, welcome in. If you have been listening to us for a few times, welcome back. Glad to have you. And if you're here, whether you're here for a few laughs or you're exploring faith or you just want a different perspective on the Bible, you're in the right place today. Glad to be here. Glad to be with you guys. And as always, I got to get started with a get to know you question, boys.
Let's go.
If you could live anywhere on earth and money's not an issue, where would you live and why?
We need like a theme song to this. Getting to know you. Like something like that.
We got it.
I
we-
could write jingles. Did you?
Isolate it, play
Yeah.
it, add a little tune behind it, and
Getting to know you. Getting to know you. Getting to know you.
we nailed
Auto
it.
tune?
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't need autotune. My tone is perfect.
Yeah, that's the
I
problem.
am
You guys are
perfect
actually,
in all of my ways.
yeah, you guys are actually good singers. You have served on worship teams. I'm the guy that, you know, those like Sunday fails where they like the pastors accidentally mic'd, and you know that I'm waiting for that to happen where we're gonna do some live stream and I'm gonna say something, or the audio is gonna pull up and be like, yeah, we're not gonna go in there anymore. So
Are you sure?
I
think
yeah, if I could
decent place,
live
yeah.
anywhere, you know, I am not very well traveled. I mean, just the United States, but from what I have heard, I would really enjoy like Spain or Italy. Like I would love to be around like authentic, like old world food, and then also be around like a place that has history around it. Like I think those would just be really fun. If we could just like to live in like a Spanish villa, you know, like in, you know, across like a, I don't know, like that type of stuff. I just watched Gladiator 2, and so I'm also thinking of like that scene where he's running his hands through the wheat field, and I'm like, I just, where that house he's walking to, I want to live there. Like that looks awesome, man, and just eat good food and hang out and be in, yeah, that would be awesome.
Huh. Where would I live? Right where I'm at.
God
just
has me
love-
right where he needs.
Yeah, wherever God wants me. Yeah. That's the spirit of the question, isn't it? I imagine people are offended that I just laughed at that, but I think I'm too annoyed or too concerned if people are offended, but maybe not. Anyway, where would I live? I have no idea. Somewhere warm, not insanely hot. I'm not talking equator. Yeah, Greece sounds nice, right? But whatever it is, you have to have enough money to be able to do whatever it is you want. So, yeah, Greece just sounds cool. Like outside the touristy areas of Mykonos or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds cool. I feel like a houseboat. Like I have romantic ideas about things, but I think what if you had like a houseboat and you're able to just kind of hang out in the Mediterranean, and then
Mhm.
when it gets into the later months like September, October, all the way through, and where the water gets all crazy, you actually have a little villa that you go to on land. And
Yeah,
yeah,
you're
so
speaking the dream now.
yeah,
That's it.
so once I'm admitted into the Illuminati, from the last episode.
Call back to the previous episode. There you go.
There we go. How about you, Ron?
So I
30 miles
I
south
think
of where I'm at right now.
I think yeah, no. I think you guys are gonna probably think I'm nuts, but I think I would love to live in Montana someday. In 2020, my family and I got to go to Montana. I was officiating a wedding there, and I'd never been before, and I fell in love with that place. I
Yeah.
thought it was amazing. And I love the mountains too. And so when in 2021, when I knew like we were getting ready to transition from the church we were at, and I was looking for a lead pastor position to transition into, I really wanted to go to Montana. And I was actually in like the interview process with a church in Missoula, Montana. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is the Lord. The Lord's bringing us to my dream place. And I ended up obviously not getting it because we're in Delaware now, and I was crushed. And now we live 10 minutes. Yeah, now we live 10 minutes from the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's all right.
The beach is a win.
I think
that's a good one.
Yeah, for sure. That's a nice consolation prize for sure. So, and it's awesome. Like, so like the touristy spot down here is called Rehoboth Beach,
Okay.
but there's a lot of good beaches around here, and people like, it's weird. People come from all over to come to Delaware beaches for some reason. I'm
Really?
talking New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, even like the Carolinas. People come from everywhere for some reason to come to Delaware beaches. It's weird, but
nice.
yeah.
Interesting.
We'll have to visit someday.
Yeah. Have you guys out.
Just fly us
gotta
out.
Well,
have us
maybe one day we'll be able to consider it a work expense, and we'll do a live pod
Very good.
together. So
Perfect.
My honorarium, I only ask 5,000.
that's
fair.
that's
It's
doable.
reasonable.
That's
Yeah,
doable.
Yeah.
And only brown M&Ms in your rider, right? Like in your green room.
How else am I going to know you actually paid attention to the rest of the contract?
And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What band did that? Was that Aerosmith or
I
something
feel like
that?
it was Aerosmith, but they had some bad experiences before that where things were wrong. Really
Can
bad
imagine.
wrong. Yeah.
Is so $5,000 for honorarium? Is that what Paul was talking about when he said double honor to your leaders?
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry, 10.
double. Which, by the way, guys, there's a chance that I might be in Omaha sometime this year.
Let's
So
go.
we really might get to do in-person pod together. So
Love it. You'll
Nice.
have to pack the microphone with you.
yeah, for
We,
sure. I definitely will.
We have a setup at my church.
That's
that we
right.
can
Yeah.
do that live. If we
Awesome.
want.
Put it in the calendar. We're making it happen.
I
There you
just
go.
heard you offer that, Greg. So I'm gonna accept.
I'll let Josh and Autumn know. Hey, one of you has to be there and record it and then send it. Yeah, we'll get it figured out.
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you guys for humoring me. Thanks for sharing where you'd live if you could live anywhere. Today, we're going to dive back into the scriptures, and we're going to look at
I have a
the
better
story
answer, by the way. I'm sorry.
for what? Where you're going to live? Let's hear it.
Wherever the love of my wife is, that is my dream.
I think you're assuming that your wife has time to listen to podcasts, and she might listen to this. So
She doesn't. So
Yeah.
Sorry, it's near Valentine's
Are
Day.
are
and,
any
my
of our
gift-
wives going to listen to this podcast? I think
Uh,
Robin
I-
might be the best chance.
I don't know.
Like,
I don't know. I don't know.
They
They're
have to hear
tired.
us ramble about this stuff regularly.
Yeah. So good luck. Yeah.
Look, I have to hear you speak.
Yeah.
A lot.
This is a protected, safe space, is what you're
Mhm.
saying. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Nobody that's listening, tag my wife in any message in this. Okay. Like we need to keep this on the DL, you know?
I figured it out one time. It's not exact, but I've spoken like over 1,000 times in different venues. And so she's had to hear
She's heard at some point at some
that
point.
poor lady. I don't want to hear anybody talk as much as she's had to hear me talk. Anyway,
That's funny.
so,
So
anyway, sorry.
today,
There you go.
no, you're good. Today, what we're going to dive into, we're going to dive into the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. I think it's a pretty well-known story. I think a lot of people, maybe that's an overstatement. There's many people, I'll say it that way, many people who are Christ followers, Christians, whatever, who probably are really familiar with this story, but I'm really interested to kind of get in the weeds with you guys today. So I'm going to read a little bit, and then we can discuss. So before I start reading, do you guys have any initial thoughts you want to share? If not, we can just get into it.
It's all about immigration rights.
Oh gosh, there you go. There you go.
All right. On that note.
That's the safe bet, Eric. That's the safe bet. So Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 1, it says, "At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, 'Let's make bricks and harden them with fire.' In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world.' But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. 'Look,' he said, 'the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other.' In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city is called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world." So I feel like there's a lot in those little 9 verses.
Mhm.
What do you guys think?
It's a fun story. I mean, like the parts of it. I mean, I say fun just in that like we get the Bible acknowledging different cultures. I essentially for the first time. Like there's always been kingdoms that we see, but now there's some of the justification of, well, what did the sons of Noah go and do, and where was happening. So like initially like a family would stick together, and then now it's going to separate from there. But yeah, I mean we're starting to see technology, like the development of different building methods in different regions, and then as always that we tend to do, we start to see pride and hubris almost immediately rise up when we start creating a new method of living life. It's an interesting introduction to this part of the story.
Yeah, seems to be a ziggurat that's which is basically a pyramid, but without the smooth stuff added onto it.
Yeah.
At least at this stage, that's really it. People manage to come together into a city. In my opinion, there seems to be some pushback against the be fruitful and multiply, go out kind of thing. And kind of a people choosing a different direction than what was ordained.
What is the significance at the beginning where it says at one time all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words? Is that literal? Is it a metaphor? Is it figurative? Like what, I mean, what's going on there? Like what do you guys think?
I think it's just storytelling, but I don't have to be right. This is one of those where I don't have a fist hold grip on this story. It doesn't mean I don't have a understanding of the story. It means that what I mean is I don't need the story to do something. Not personally. If I was being grilled about it, I'd say I think this is trying to explain within that culture how we got where we are, and in that sense, it fits the idea of myth, which some of these others do also. I need them to do the work of the intent of the story and moving it along. And at the same time, if somebody says, no, this is literal and this is exactly how it happened. Okay, great. It's still doing, as always, at the last number of episodes, that's been my theme, because that is what I think is that the goal of the thing is the most important. So if you want it to be real, then great. I don't mean that demeaning in any way. If you're going to say, do I think it was absolutely it physically happened? I go, it doesn't seem to be how it's written. That seems written in a different way, but cool.
Yeah, I read it on the side that they all at least had a similar shorthand language that seems to be clear. Like even just the establishment of like other regions had different ways of building things. That then, whenever this group of people all settled together, there's probably just hey, we're all gonna speak this language. Whatever culture you might have used this word for it, we're gonna choose this word in this city to mean something. So it's somewhat of the establishment of like nations is I think what we're getting here. Some of the questions that we're I think trying to ask in a little bit of this of contextualization. Why is this part being written? Is that there's a greater question of like the unity, and what does that do when people come together without God's intention and plan attached to it? What happens? So how a nation is founded, and then the language it uses is really, really important. And so what does that look like, and then what do we do with that power and that information? I don't know, Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's literal. I tend to lean that way, but even if it was meant to be literal, I use this logic. It was written thousands of years ago, and the knowledge that they had of the world, it was a lot smaller, right? The world was a lot smaller as far as they were concerned. They didn't know that there was this whole other side of the world that had these other lands and other people, right? And so like I think about in the book of Jonah, when it says that God told Jonah to go to Nineveh, and then he got on a ship to go to Tarshish. Well, Tarshish in this world, the world of the Bible, was like the end of the world.
Right.
Like it's trying to make the point, like he went the opposite direction as far as you could go. Well, we know that's not literally true. He didn't go as far as he could go because he didn't like cross the Atlantic Ocean, right? So for this to say like this means that everybody all over the face of the world as we know it spoke the same language, I'm like, I don't think that's true, because the authors didn't know like how big the world was, so I'm just use logic there, however flawed that is. Like that's just where I kind of land.
Is this where we start getting some of our like Babylon ends up being a representation of the people against God, God's
Hmm.
people at least.
Okay.
Is this our introduction of that then? And so is God like I'm just asking questions
Yes.
to see what this brings up, but is this the point in which God chooses that, or is this then because obviously when you read the previous chapter, we start to see a separation of all of Noah's sons into all these different tribes, and then as they grow up to become nations, but suddenly Babylon becomes one right here that God puts a very special attention onto and doesn't want them to be unified, doesn't want, it's not Babylon yet, but it's in the land that would become something that we would worry about.
Yeah, it's in that space. If it's connected to what if you're reading later in the Old Testament, is that version of Assyria and Babylon and stuff, or vice versa, then it would require, and we think Moses wrote this, we would think it wouldn't be, if we think Moses 100% wrote this and there's no edits, then I don't think it would be connected. If we think they were editing later on, then it could be connected. And a lot of people do think that. I'm not enough of a scholar to have an opinion on those things, but I'm more just aware that that conversation happens, that they think that many people think that there were edits that adjusted the interpretation of what had already been put forth and stuff as they were scribing and stuff, and editing, or that they edited while they were scribing some. But and how that breaks down also is mildly interesting, but it's not a huge interest of mine. But anyway, so is it possible? Yeah, especially if you have a view that we bring in a New Testament version, all holy men spoke, and this is how we get the Bible. They wrote down as God spoke to them and stuff. Then we could then go, okay, yeah, God was speaking way ahead. It was Moses, but he's also envisioning something that doesn't exist yet and things like that. And so that I'm just trying to put together the way people might, or how you could connect those things and it not be where it just is, rather than try to define everything. But yeah,
so you long story short, you don't that what you're reading in this is not the beginning of a long-term grudge that God holds, but instead just kind of circumstantially, this is the area in which it was happening, and then later on, as people settled into this area and became known as Assyrian or Babylonian, that they
it was
happen to be the
definitely
ones
in that
were,
area. I lean toward, I actually do. I don't think my opinion on this matters. Meaning I, like I said, I'm not enough of a scholar to make what I'm saying to me be substantial. So don't, that said, my opinion at the level that I know, is that this is pointing to the eventual creation of Babylon, that it is a statement. I mean, Babel and the name Babylon very much connected, and I do think that it is pointing to that. So just to be as complicated as possible.
Yeah. Which conveniently Babel means confusion. So
there you
go. So it works out. Yeah. Ryan, what about you? Where are you on this? Like, kind of like we said, we're establishing the groundwork of a lot of stuff that's going to come in the Bible. Some of it intentional, some of it just being it's all living in the same region. So there's going to be a crossover, and the names of these areas change very quickly. Sometimes chapter to chapter, but definitely book to book. Where are you at with? Out of all of the cities and all the stuff, obviously they are building something, but do you feel like God is looking at a group of people and going like, "Ooh, watch out for them"?
Obviously, I don't think it's a coincidence that Babel means confusion, and that's the root word of Babylon or Babylonia. You know what it says here, and I also think it's interesting, or there we go again. I also think it's fascinating, worth noting that it says that they found a plain of land. They found a plain in the land of Babylonia, and they settled there. and I know what that means to settle an area of land, but I like me as like, just not trying to read it from like a scholarly perspective, just like Meathead Ryan perspective, like they settled for less than what God had for them. That's I see that settling on different layers, if that makes sense. Like God has this purpose for them. He has this thing he wants for them, but they're not doing what he asked them to do, and they're settling for something less than, you know what I mean? So I think, I don't know, in my opinion, there's like a deeper story being told, and maybe I'm reading into that a little bit, but
yeah. I like the metaphorical parts of this, even the difference between complacency and contentment, like one of them being just a passive, well, I guess this is probably, I don't know, this looks just like the desert we were in 7 days ago, so why not here? There's running water, so let's just kind of settle with this. But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting kind of idea to start looking at this. We get technology, or at least some of our first use of technology in here. Do you guys find that interesting or important? Like whenever we start seeing the introduction of, later on, we're going to be getting to Abram real soon, and we start getting establishments of like healthy lifestyles, or at least the written, like how to live healthy, which is an advancement of technology too. Like, so God's bringing advancements to his humanity and allowing them to advance and become new things. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the story's going from very wide.
Yeah.
Nothing exists, or everything's in chaos, and then narrowing it down. And so by chapter 12, we're hitting Abram, and brand new, a single character who we hit, and there's an entire storyline that begins there. And this is all of this is setting up this very specific story about this guy who says yes to God, and then the nation that comes from him. And so that story, and then the continued breakdowns of how mankind and we try to follow God and just choose not to over time. And so this is how do we get from water to solving this problem, water to creation, to everything's good, tov, to the breakdown of it. Now we need a solution to this. And so as a story arc goes, we're seeing the conflict kind of build. We see it somewhat like a minor climax as we hit that ark thing and the flood. And now we have kind of a buildup again. Maybe the flood fixed it. We have this Noah covenant, and now we can go forward. Yes, finally, things are going to work. And then you get the structure of Genesis. These are the generations of, and you could see that a bunch through Genesis. And then we hit chapter 12, and we got the generations of Abraham's dad. But anyway, that's how we can kind of see the rest of the structure of that. So this is the setup for it. How do we get to this guy Abram living in the land of Ur, and which is in the area, large area. We're talking hundreds of miles, but up near over near the rivers still. So anyway, I have a map in my head, and that doesn't help. If I say over near the rivers, it could be some river that's near you. And I mean Tigris and Euphrates, but and then a few hundred miles north. Sorry.
I like when you get nerdy, you slowly get quieter and quieter until you just fade out.
Fade out and realize and then I probably say, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And no one cares.
So I will say this. I do think the whole story hinges on verse 4. I think the whole point of the story is verse 4, where it says, "Then they said, Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. So to us, that doesn't really mean much, but to an ancient reader,
Yeah.
they would have seen that as like, oh, that's an act of war on God. So I just
invading
like
his space.
Yeah, like we're trying to get to him because we want to be where he's at, you know.
Yeah.
And so like in the last episode, it talked about how the flood was an act of war on humanity. Well, now we see here it's almost like they're declaring an act of, you know, they're making an act of war towards God. They're trying to get to him, and I think this is the depth of the fall. Like this is the furthest that humanity has fallen to this point. A lot of people say it's the flood, you know, every inclination of their heart was wicked. I think it's this. This is the lowest that they go, trying to overthrow God. And so I think that's, in my opinion, that's that this whole story hinges on that verse. So like trying to make the point of humanity has sunk so low, you know.
Yeah, I think I agree. The idea of creating a name for themselves is to not be under the name of God. Yeah, I agree, Ryan. That's what is going on.
Yeah.
So,
What if this is a tipping point again? We're coming across another tipping point. What you know, we talked about just like a general sense of wickedness. This has some very descriptive things. One like a at least an outright statement from a group of people. Where Noah was just kind of a lifestyle. It seems like they were living completely away from God. This one is a unified statement, which is let us become famous, let us reach the heavens, let us invade his space so that we can become famous for ourselves, and whatever that upper space meant to them at that time. What pinnacle tipping point are we talking about? Like if you could break it to a word, like what, I guess maybe like what sin are they committing? Like what act are they committing that is making this more than the other things?
if you built a temple, so let's say we think the ziggurat is a temple, or the tower, rather than define it, is a temple to a god or the god or whatever. You're creating, at least among the possibilities, you're creating a space for the god to be. This is not the intent of this. This is an intent to invade that other space. If you're back to that Genesis 1 account and understanding or thinking about in the sense that if we exist there, how are we reading that? How are we experiencing this? We're thinking that there's the waters below. Then there's the land that we're on right now. Those rivers next to you had to come from somewhere, waters below. And the heaven where we can see the birds and where we can see the lights above those. We're talking about invading the space above the birds. And so this is where God is, the gods, or however you want to, and we are going to make a name for ourselves. We no longer need the name of whatever. In the future, we'll read names like Baal. And if you're reading into Mesopotamian stuff, Ishtar, and others that right now they're just blanking, but we don't even need those. We're going to become the gods that are supposedly created us, and we're going to be the definers. We're going to go grab, maybe here's where I'm going to jump into the maybes, is maybe we're going to go grab the tablet of destinies and become the authors. We're going to become the authors of our own fate, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I had to pinpoint it to one specific sin, I guess pride. To have the audacity that they think they could go toe to toe with God. Like, I mean, I don't know anything more prideful than that. Yeah, if you forced me to, you know, to bring it to one word, I think I would probably have to say that is pride. And Yeah, and I like what you said too, Eric, how it went from like it's just like a lifestyle to, and just this wickedness was just a natural like outflow from their sin to now it's like they're intentionally trying to wage war, which is just wild to think about. Like
Yeah, yeah.
like when you think about it in the terms of pride, like like to think you could wage war with God, like it
Mhm.
doesn't get more prideful than that.
Yeah, it's a total, it's a huge statement. Just to say in and of itself, like everything else has seemed kind of, not that there wasn't like a decision that was made, like Adam and Eve made a decision, the Cain makes a decision, the people that were living in the land around Noah were making decisions. This is a very clear decision, but this somehow unified choice is very significant. And even the I don't know, this is maybe me reading a little too much into the story, but some of the common language, maybe metaphorically, doesn't just mean literal common speaking languages, but maybe it's a common intent.
Nice.
That an entire nation would have a common intent of what they're choosing to do.
Mhm.
Is there's I think a very dangerous problem that we're facing in this. And then what we start to see later on, whenever there are direct attacks and intentional decisions against God to God's people, to the Israelite people, God kind of like goes, hey, I've already established my opinion on this, and it's I will scatter you. So I mean, it's one of those like come on, try me,
Which
remember
does
this
happen.
moment. Yeah.
Is this God speaking out against the one world government?
Back
Is
to
that
the
what this is?
conspiracy. Yeah.
Yeah, Alpha and Omega, Genesis to Revelation, it's,
Or right, you could ask that question, or you can go, "Oh, is the one world government actually idea? Is it actually an anti-God idea?"
Yeah.
Is my, I think
Yeah.
if we're going to include the story, the correct question.
a direct intent. I
Yeah.
think some of the reason why a lot of the history around World War II and the decisions of the Nazi Party was there was like a very direct intent against a group of people. Like, sure, there was a become a world power and all this stuff, but in order to radicalize a group of people, there had to be an intent against a group of people. You had to make an enemy, and when you make an enemy of God, does not end well. When you unify your voice against God and then God's people, just doesn't. I don't know. History tells us in His Word He does not handle that lightly, and tends to come at it pretty difficult. To the point of like Saul's disobedience is to not do. To not go against and utterly destroy a nation that was intent against him. And so you go like, oh, he's being a little extreme against Saul, but look at his response here. He goes, look at people who are intentionally saying they will not follow. Not only that, they're trying to invade my kingdom. So Saul, go take care of business. Oh, you're not going to do it? Well, I'm going to rise up someone who will. And so I don't know. I like this. I like this part of it. Ryan, I liked kind of your kind of narrowing it down. Being forced to narrow it down to like pride, because that I think gets us to that point of making those intentional statements. Is well, I'm the one who gets to make them, and I deserve to make them, or I have the right to make them.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you guys too. There's a couple things I wanted to ask you guys. I've heard this before in this story used, and I'll tell you what it's used for after I read it to you. But verse 6, when God came down, He saw what they're doing. He said, "Look, the people are united, and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them." And so I've heard I've heard pastors use this as like, well, the principle here is God is showing how powerful community is.
Mm.
That's why
Oh,
it's
wow.
so important that we need community with each other, because when we have
Wow.
community, nothing will be impossible for us. So like,
Wow.
what do you guys think
Lord.
about that?
I think I'd run away from that church.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah, what a weird way to take a punishment story in the Bible and somehow make it about your church,
Man, wow.
and how it could be potentially good. Yeah, that feels
Yeah.
I
that's
guess I
weird.
get the heart behind that. Like the wanting to encourage your larger congregation to understand like there is a power in a community with a core center of God. But that's the key thing at the very end of it. It's not like, oh, just because we came together, then suddenly it's good. It's like, no. You have to have a standard that is at the core center of it. And what we are missing is the core center that is God. So yeah.
Yeah. It'd be like using a serial killer story to prove that
Describe love.
the power, right? The power of somebody with an intent, and we can do this. Look at Jeffrey Dahmer, what he could
Somebody who's
accomplish.
passionate.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like,
Ugh.
you couldn't come up with that. I get your point. Choose a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean,
Mm.
it's important to to the doing the work here and not overly read into it and make stories that don't exist in the story. But even to that, I guess like speaking to it is just like be careful then like what you hold on the pedestals to be examples of God. Because even this, like if we have any pastors that are listening, there's especially if you're a regular communicator, and you've told the story of the Tower of Babel before, or a pastor told you, it's small group season, get them to sign up and you need to write a message. There's a real temptation to just find the word together or the word unity and then turn that into something that it's not. And Greg, something you said at one of the very first episodes, we just got to do better Bible. And so if I can encourage anybody who's preparing messages, one, just not using this to describe small groups, but for later on preaching, it is okay for you to not try to fit the square peg in a round hole in order to make your message work. This story can be its own thing. And then your opinion, and then there are other verses that do this work, but as a pastor, you can present your opinion of being in a small group and in a community is a powerful work. And your real life story is more impactful than trying to make the Tower of Babel fit somehow into that. That is not how you use the Bible well. Is try to manipulate it to make your point have validity because you don't have a clever story or an ability to communicate well to your people the importance of this. Your own story is 1,000 times better than this. Not the Bible, but you trying to hammer fist this in. So
I guess you could do community is good. Here's how to do it wrong. If you notice these things, I don't know if you're trying to, but even then, a message of negation is going to be hard work.
It's good teaching. And so
you can teach
if you go into your message, I think you guys do this really well. You guys are really great teachers. Going into it of, hey, here's a Sunday in which we're going to teach some things. So there's going to be some do's and don'ts. But especially a lot of Old Testament is a lot of don'ts. And then we get a few people. And even then it's a few stories where you go, oh, do that. And then even when you make a mistake, do this,
I feel like this is, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. I don't want people to think I'm being overly critical here, but I'm gonna share a thought about that. Like, oh, this is about community and, see what can happen when we can. I think when pastors, when pastors or preachers or, speakers, teachers, whatever, when they get to places where they're turning tricks with scripture,
Mm.
to try to like be clever or, you know, get people to ooh and ah, or, you know, I never heard that before. I think like, I think that's a symptom to me of them not knowing the scriptures well enough,
Mhm.
because when you begin to learn the scriptures really, really well, and I'm not even saying I'm a expert. I'm far from it. I have so much that I have to learn still. But I think when you begin to learn the scriptures well, and you begin to learn that it is one big story that's leading to Jesus, right?
Amen.
Like, you understand that it's saying a lot of the same things over and over and over. It's not trying to say a different story. It's telling one story.
Mhm.
Very
And
much.
so when you come to that realization and you're okay with that, I think you'll be okay with like, well, my people have maybe heard this before. There's a lot of things I say on Sunday that I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over, but I'm like, hey, if God needed to repeat himself, then why do I need to be different, you know? And so
Yeah.
I guess I just more want to encourage like pastors, don't, you know, if there are pastors listening, don't feel like you have to you know, come up with this earth-shattering interpretation every week, because, you know,
Yeah.
or else people are going to get bored and leave your church or whatever. Like, let the scriptures do its work, you know.
Yeah.
Like
Amen.
you know, so
I went to a church planning conference, and one of the coaches at this conference said, in picking the name of your church, he goes, if you picked a name and then when you Googled it, there was only a few results for that name, you are not unique. It's a bad idea. Um, and the whole thought behind it was like, it like being unique isn't like the goal in building a church. It's like that, and he was kind of talking more from the perspective of marketing, which is like, listen, everybody's tried every idea. You're really not that original. You just probably haven't heard it, or you're in a region that information didn't get to, which is becoming more and more impossible in our internet age. But the same is true with this. And why sometimes when we answer, there's a little bit of reservation in our answer to say this is the solidified idea or the truth that's happening
Yeah.
here, because I think to say, oh, we came up with the solution here on this podcast is like, no, like no, that's not the point, because then we're going to fall into this trap of Babel, which is we have finished seeing the revealing of God. We have, this story can no longer be read to us. We no longer have to come back to it, even if it's just in its narrative structure. When like it would be, imagine how crazy this would sound when somebody says, yeah, I'm actually reading through the Bible this year, and I just hit Genesis 10, but of course we skip over chapter 11, and then I'm really excited to start chapter 12. Well, the question you would immediately go is like, well, why'd you skip over chapter 11? And it's like, oh, I've just read it so many times, and I think I got everything I need out of it. Oh, what you just said, Ryan, you missed the point of why there's chapters. Like, you were supposed to read this as a whole, not in its individual sections, and you made this about a section, not a story. That's trying to be said here. And so the Tower of Babel, I think it's like, those we get a bunch of stories like this in the narrative and history parts, where it seems like a side tangent to the thing that's actually happening. But to kind of bring it back to the beginning of what we said, we're really trying to narrow it down to a really important character, a really important person that we're introduced to. So you need to establish the world in which this land and a man named Abram is about to come out of. And this is the pinnacle world. This is why God is now going to choose a single person, a single family, to make this new covenant.
Yeah, and we do this stuff with all literature.
Yeah.
Good literature. Epic. I'm clarifying. So I'm thinking Tolkien stuff. So you go, why does the show Rings of Power? Why was that interesting for us nerds? Because and why would you've got, say you're a nerd, you've read The Hobbit. If you're a nerd, you read the Lord of the Rings, all three, and you kind of got that. if you are, I don't know what you would call it. What might you call it? If you're reading the Silmarillion and all the extra stuff, if you have no idea what I just said, that's you're such a better person for it.
You're free.
Yeah, exactly. But there's something, you're so wrapped up in the world that you're really interested. Where did this world come from? How did these things develop and things like that? And that's some of the brilliance of Tolkien is, to me, while he states that it's not religious and nothing is intended, there is this throwback to epic tales and stuff from Norse mythology, but also from Hebrew ideas and things like that, or the story of the Bible is really what I'll say. As far as structure and what is the buildup. And so we can look, we could start the whole Bible at chapter 12 and meet Abram. But we have this, what is the world up to this? And it's this, everything's great. God's Tov, everything suddenly collapses. And how do we get from out east where the garden was to this area where we find Abram, which is in the area of Babylonia, kind of stuff, where two rivers kind of fork out. And then you've got, again, I have a map in my head. You've got this strip of what we call Israel, Canaan, this space. And then north of that, we've got where Haran, and then coming down, but off to the east, we've got where Iraq and stuff currently are, but the Babylon and where we meet Abram. How do we get here? And this is the progress of the story. And what Eric is talking about a little earlier is a forest and trees thing, where we can we lose the forest, which is the big thing that we're inside, because we're so interested in the trees. And the trees are great, but you can't forget. But don't forget you're in a forest. So the story about Tower of Babel, really good, but don't forget that we're in this longer, bigger narrative, which is the forest, because that is what is placing us within the story. And that's the work that's being done. Is we're moving east over into, or we're moving west over into Babylon. So we're not trying to connect this with where did people originally show up in Africa and things like that. Those are great questions, but this is what this story, this bigger arc of the story is doing.
Yeah, that's good work. I like that stuff.
Yeah.
So in this, God says, let us go down another plurality. Well, we've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but very similar thing. But then we're going to confuse people with different languages, or they won't be able to understand each other. I think the general consensus, at least on this podcast here today, is there wasn't an exact common language. So then what does it mean to, I know this isn't necessarily what the story is telling, but maybe thematically, what does it mean to then confuse and maybe change their common intent? Do you think
I don't have a problem with there being, if we're not talking what we think of as global, I don't have a problem with there being a central language that this is what they talk. You've got a people migrating to space. We're not, if we're going to go literal, which is fine. I'm not downing that at all. We're not talking about 1 billion people. We're talking about a relatively small. I can't.
1,000 maybe.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We are not talking about a giant population to what we think of as giant population. This is a lot of people for that space, or that time, is what I mean by space. But we're not talking about the massive numbers that we think of as large population, fully capable of doing the technological advances that Eric's talking about. And so what is the intent that's going on? We're going to go invade a different territory with that.
Ryan, what are your thoughts? Scattering people with different languages.
Yeah. The intent thing seems to strike the greatest chord with me, I think. Just changing their intents. And is this where like the desire to conquer other nations comes from? You know what I mean? Like everybody has their own intention. You know, I don't know. Like there's not a whole lot of data to really like make sense of it one way or the other, in my opinion.
Sure.
And I know that's really unsatisfying for people who really want answers to these questions, but
Yeah.
that's just the answer, I think. Like
Yeah.
there's not a ton of data, and I'm not going to extrapolate from incomplete information, you know.
Can we at least say that this isn't a super smart strategic move of taking a bunch of people who were rebelling against God and then scattering them across the earth? I mean, no judgment, but it just doesn't seem it also works out very much. Like, because then now you have a bunch of individual nations that have this memory, at least this potentially genetic core memory of like, ooh, like there's a little bit of the fear of God that now exists in everything. When God starts presenting himself to these other nations later on, they're aware that there is this God to fear. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting, hey, take all these disobedient people and throw them. Right now in my oldest son's classroom, there's about 4 kids, according to my son, who are just massively disobedient, like just disrupt class. And sometimes they have to pause the class because one of the kids is, for whatever reason, their life is having issues and they're being disruptive in class. They have to remove all the kids out of the class in order to do stuff. So they can't even bring the kid out, things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, and I was asking my son, like, well, what have your teachers done in order to stop this problem? And he goes, Dad, they've tried everything. They've put them in, because they have their desks like in groups of 4 where they kind of had like these islands. So it's not like just a bunch of rows of desks facing a whiteboard. So it's more interactive kind of learning and things like that. So they've done where they put all 4 kids in their own island so they don't disrupt other kids. But then that was bad. And then they tried scattering them across the room to different islands. And hey, we'll take this one and put it with a lot of the regular obedient kids or kids who enjoy this subject. And he goes, that didn't work. They tried separating the kids into different classrooms, but then just when they came back for lunch and recess, it just blew up. And it was like one of those, I was kind of having, like, as we were talking about the story here today, it was just like, oh, these kids were going to do what they were going to do no matter what location. And the problem isn't like, hey, let's change locations. And that's not what God's trying to do. It's not just trying to put them in different locations. It's no. There's a heart thing. There's something going on internally that but for the sake of the greater thing that I'm trying to accomplish, we cannot have them unified in one space. That is the worst version of this story. Well, they're already just going to be bad, so let's just leave them to their own devices. Like, nope, that's not good teaching. That's not good parenting. That's not good authority that God is having over his creation. So I don't know. I just think about that story as we're kind of looking at how this wraps up. He's just like, listen, the worst version of this is, yes, I need to get to Abram and I'm getting to that story, but the worst version is I just leave this the way that it is. It's like, no, you don't get to invade my kingdom. This has to be scattered. And then now we can start again.
Yeah.
I think too, we can understand from this story that evil people are just going to find a way to do evil. And when I say evil people, I just mean us, like everybody, right? Like if we're not intentionally trying to seek God and trying to submit ourselves to him every day, we are going to figure out a way to do something evil. Whether intentionally or not. You told that story, Eric, and it reminded me of a movie I saw once, and is a prison movie. As funny as that might be, but is about prison gangs, and this prison gang became too powerful, and so the warden decided, I'm gonna split this gang up. And I'm going to send each member back to the state that they came from. And at the end of this movie, they had this little powwow before they all get split up. And the leader of this gang, he says, they think they're they're breaking us. They think they're destroying us. He said, we're going to flip it on them. We're going to spread. And he says this word, we're going to spread the gospel of whatever the name of the gang was. And we're going to grow even bigger than we already are. Instead of being right here at this gang and growing here, we're going to grow across the whole country. And I'm like, oh, that's terrible. So like, there's not really a good solution when people are bent on doing evil. I mean, if to take this gang situation, and continue it out, if the warden would have just said, what can I do? This gang is going to kill every other person in the prison until they're the only ones left. And then what's going to happen? All right. Or you send them out and then they just start populating those, so there's not a good option, but the worst option is to not do anything, so
Totally.
Yeah. You can burn it down or you can mitigate. Yeah. I really do think the story is just moving it toward the direction it's going, but what they're doing is fighting God effectively. And well, they're not being effective, but that's what they're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's what it's doing here. So
yeah, the way I explain it to people in my church whenever I have discussions about it, because I lead small group and stuff like that. And I was like, whenever I get to this point or this story comes up, I say like Genesis 11 shows how badly everything was broken by sin. And then immediately after in chapter 12, God's like, all right, I have a plan to fix this whole thing. Right. And so like immediately after we see the depth of the fall or just how badly everything's broken, we see, oh, our God has a plan to change it all. He has a plan to fix it, so
it's a contrast story. I agree.
Yeah. And that's the hope that we have is like, God wasn't surprised by this. He wasn't caught off guard and he has a plan, so
yeah.
I really quickly before we end, because I think we're pretty close to being done unless you guys have more to share. But I wanted to share this thought that I had with you guys, or not thought that I heard other pastors preach this, and I wanted to get your guys' opinion about this. Confusing the length. Confused. Yeah, you won't like it. You'll hate it. In fact, this confusing the language, and God confused the language and he scattered them. And I heard a Pentecostal pastor, I think with that little intro, you know where I'm going.
Those guys.
A Pentecostal pastor talk about how baptism of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues is God trying to redeem this moment. Lord. I've heard that preached from a microphone. Thoughts?
I think people need to watch the video so they can see our reaction to that. Just there's our pitch. You need to have one of those a moment, our pitch, to watch it on YouTube.
Look,
geez.
I'm Assemblies of God pastor, so I'm pro
Same.
baptism of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues and stuff. So I just want to establish I'm not anti, and yeah, but come on. Let it be itself. Just let it be. I don't need Abraham. I don't need Isaac. Who am I thinking of? Jacob wrestling with Jesus. He's wrestling with an angel. It's enough. That doesn't sanctify the story more. It doesn't become a better story because now you grabbed some random part of the New Testament and shoved it on top of it.
Have you seen that meme of like men will do anything but go to therapy? Like this kind of feels like pastors will do anything but actually read the scripture. And so I don't. Here's if you attend a church that stuff like this kind of happens, or you feel like there's a liberalism with interpreting the Bible, meaning just like moving the words to make it fit an idea that I think very clearly the story is not about. I would say, one, just take this in prayer. Just I'm a big believer in chew the meat, spit the bones. Our job in churches is not have this 100% agreement where everything that is said means that it's perfect, and
Right.
and that's called a cult, not a church.
Right.
And that's all of us following a single leader. And that when there's no pastor that is our example, they're not our standard. Jesus is. And so obviously Jesus doesn't have a passage in which he talks about the Tower of Babel and brings clarity where there isn't, because Jesus didn't need to bring clarity to this conversation. So we don't need to make it more than what it is. If you feel like this is deeply conflicting with your spirit, something this could be dangerous, but hopefully you have honorable leaders and shepherds in your church that want to have these conversations. Request a conversation with your pastor to talk about these things. Hey, I'm not coming at this combative. I'm not coming with this where I'm trying to disagree. For the sake of me being a part of this congregation and continuing to hear these teachings, I want to be at least in agreement of where we're trying to go with this conversation. I think that's a really healthy thing. I worked for a pastor where there was a point in our conversations with each other where I said, after a long time, it was like 4 or 5 months of talking about scripture and reading the Bible and going over messages, where I said, I have no question that we read the same Bible. I do have a question if we have a different God. Meaning we are reading the same text, but when you read him, he's really angry. And when I read him, I think he's really I think he's sad he can't love us because we put up a block. And he's not trying to break that down by anger. And so it's okay to have those conversations, but just doing it with honor and respect. You might have, if you're on YouTube, you saw me put my hands over my face. It's just because there's some exhaustion just being a pastor and feeling like you're doing some of the work to avoid these problems. And then you have people come to your church that at least for me, I have people who come to my church and say stuff like this, and I'm like, oh, like if that's the example you brought up now, the actual thing that I want to talk about is going to be a really deep conversation, which is fine, but okay, we got some work to do. And
sometimes if you don't understand this level, how are we going to have that conversation? Because I have to rebuild everything. And are you open to that? And if you're like, oh, you three think you know everything, that's not the point either. If you do know things that I don't, then that's part of the engagement. Maybe I'm missing something. Or maybe we both just disagree on this thing, which are all fine anyway, to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to we have to have baseline understandings as Christ followers. There has to be the lowest common denominator of understanding before we can ever have these more in-depth conversations. Because I think what you said, do we even worship the same God? It's almost like it is a different God, right? One of the things I try to coach the people in my church in a lot is a lot of people can tell you what the Bible says, but not a whole lot of people can help you understand what it means. And I will always try to preach in a way to help people understand what it means. Because a lot of people like to take the words of the Bible and twist them and skew them. And, I just want to understand what it means so that we can, because I believe it helps us know God better, And so, I don't if there's any pastors listening that you've done this a time or two where you take things and again try to wow people with them by these maybe sketchy interpretations or whatever, no judgment, just again, I think when that happens, you're diluting the power of the gospel. You're diluting the power of what the Bible is trying to communicate. And
totally,
you're cutting the legs out from underneath it, and you don't need to do that, So
I think it's possible. I mean, if you want to do what if, okay. I mean, depends on your relationship with your congregation, and what they're able to understand, and just
Yeah.
yeah,
Just
uh,
establish that in the beginning of your
exactly. It's like
conversation.
citing. If
Yeah.
you have an idea, then be willing to admit
Mhm.
it came from someone else. It's
Yeah.
totally fine. I actually uh, believe it actually makes you seem smarter when you state where it came from,
Oh, you
because it means
read.
you read something.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well,
and
even to that, like I like using the language of, and if I was David,
mhm,
I would have done this, or I would have done
yeah,
something similar. Like you can put that's good. I think there's good teaching in the like
yeah,
putting yourself in the story, not making yourself, but just
yeah,
going, here would be my natural response. I'm not that much different than the person who made a mistake. In the Tower of Babel story, we are not that different. We are not that far away.
right.
Ryan, to your point, we are the enemies of God. And
Mhm.
with our hubris and our pride, way too often than I would like to admit on a podcast, am trying to build my own tower to heaven, in which I could supersede the work of the Holy Spirit in Jesus in my life, and I can just have some sort of direct line and I'm just like, no, that's the heart correction is don't do this. That gets scattered. That puts you in a bad place. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's part of me that now my reaction to what Ryan originally said was visceral. Is very like, oh, and like Eric said, he put his hand to his head. And um, I'm trying to, some of the adjustments I'm trying to make in my own life is to not be against so many things.
yeah.
Doesn't mean I need to be for everything. I just want whatever that I am for. I believe my initial genuine thought about this, whatever this pastor is, it's all make believe for me. So
Yeah.
what I think of though is a positive thing. Whereas this person who's speaking, I assume it's a guy, I don't know why, but is trying to encourage his congregation. And I want that for you. I
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
do. Um, I have a particular bent um,
Mhm.
that is sometimes a little narrow, and I can be, I think, and I'm more confessing here. I can be arrogant in how I come across and think.
Mhm.
I could be elitist.
Mhm.
And I don't want that. And I don't think that's what it takes to be people of scripture. I
Mhm.
don't think elitism is a necessary prerequisite to do good Bible.
Yeah.
But I would like part of the message I continue as far as what I feel moved to be and do is to help people engage the Bible and what I think of as maybe more faithful to its intent,
Mhm.
but maybe a better way of saying that is to encourage people to challenge their current points of view, to read really well. Um, if you have a thought that you think hasn't been thought of before, man, push on that. It
Mhm.
may be right, but it also may just be a thought you had.
Mhm.
So do work about it. Go ask questions. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the positive side of the internet is you can ask a question and you'll get answers, and then you can continue to refine your question to get it down, to narrow it down. I mean, man, I'm trying to very quickly give an entire how do you how do you work on a problem, how do you critically think. So it's a really complicated kind of long thing, but man, just keep trying, keep
Yeah.
that central heart, which is you want to encourage your congregation. You want them, if you're trying to say here's the value of baptism of the Holy Spirit or speaking in
Mhm.
tongues and things like that, then do that. But if you have a thought, challenge it a little bit before you bring it to people. That said, I think the heart that I imagine is awesome. So,
Yeah.
man, do that.
Yeah. And Paul's letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 10:5, just looking this up. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture the rebellious
Yeah.
thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. For anybody, pastor, child of God, just people who are trying to
Yeah.
become like Jesus, live his life. Our job is you will naturally come up with those thoughts, take them captive, and place them against the obedience to God. If
Yeah.
this leads you to a place of disobedience, don't do it. If you don't know between obedience and disobedience, man, what a beautiful reason for the church. That you could bring it to a small group, you could bring it to a pastor, a shepherd, a mentor, an elder, and present it not as fact, but as, hey, I want to discover, what have you discovered about this? Not, I want the answer. What are the discoveries that we can come to together? And man, you'll start to see things open up and become beautiful, and little pieces of heaven will start to invade your life in ways you didn't see before.
Nice.
Man, that's so good, guys. It's good stuff.
Yeah,
I think that's
thank you.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
a great place to end the conversation. Like seriously, so good, so thought provoking. If you're enjoying the Odd Testament podcast, we'd love your support. The best way to help us keep bringing this odd and inspiring and thought-provoking content to you is by showing us some love on social media. And here's how you can do that. First, take a moment to rate us on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Like, rate us there, review us.
5
Unless
stars
it's
only.
a 1, unless it's
Yes.
a 1, then quit being curmudgeonly. Curmudgeon. Yeah, that.
Curmudgeonous.
Whatever it is. Stop it. Bad.
Hey, how about we make this agreement with our listeners? If you give us a 5-star review, like a 5 stars, and then review us, like we'll read it on the pod, like maybe we'll shout you out personally, so
Good way to put a question on there. 5 stars, put a question, we'll read it.
There you go. Yeah. And hey, if you put a 1 star, we definitely won't shout you out. So
I don't know. It depends on what you write.
I still like your idea, Greg, of
after you.
the Reddit threads of like all the negative stuff and reading those. Like, I think that's a great idea. So, yeah. So find us on whatever podcast platform, rate us, review us. Next, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hit the subscribe button, notification bells. Me too. I've subscribed to all of it. So, and then finally, follow us on social media: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all those things that I'm not completely familiar with, but we're there. So follow us there. For updates. Maybe one day we'll start doing like behind the scenes things, or who knows what else we could do. But just follow us on those places, join the conversation. Your support means the world to us, and together we can keep sharing this odd and amazing content with the world. Any departing words, guys?
I like the tag. There you go. And together, you gotta bring the James Earl Jones together. Everything that the light touches
in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for listening. We enjoy bringing this stuff. This hopefully brings you life. It makes our day to be able to bring this information. So,
yeah. The story of Babel's about. I can't even come up with anything. I'm trying to make something up. Yeah. I just love you guys.
Guys, I'm tired. I'm going to bed.
All right. See you guys later.
Have a great one. See
ya. Bye.